So we've approached Berkeley time, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started and welcome everyone to our panel on building equitable and inclusive food systems at UC Berkeley. So we're very excited to kick off this event, and we wanna thank you all for being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hortensia, and along with Melina Packer, I'm an Equity and Inclusion Fellow at the Berkeley Food Institute, part of the UC system-wide Global Food Initiative. So some of you may be familiar with our work and others may not. So for the benefit of all, I'm just gonna take a couple minutes to describe what we do. So BFI serves as a hub that brings together 7 schools and colleges in a multidisciplinary effort to transform our food system. We spotlight faculty research, develop policy briefs, organize public events, host visiting fellows, and through a number of different fellowships, support graduate as well as undergraduate students in their efforts to address pressing issues such as expanding access to healthy foods, advancing sustainable agricultural practices, and promoting equity throughout our system. As fellows, Melina and I co-lead the Equity and Inclusion Project, which aims to improve campus climate by addressing both the barriers and possibilities for greater equity, diversity, and inclusion in the UC Berkeley food system. This includes academics and educational programming, student-led initiatives, and campus operations. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this panel, Kara Young. Kara is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Sociology, where she studies race, gender, and post-colonial theory. Her research investigates the emotional associations that individuals in different social structural locations have around buying and eating food. So please join me in welcoming Kara and our distinguished panelists.
Thank you so much, Hortensia. It's good to see you all here this afternoon. So as Hortensia said, my name is Kara Young, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology here at Cal. I also was one of the graduate student fellows, Equity and Inclusion Fellows for the Berkeley Food Institute last academic year. I'm very pleased to be here serving as moderator for what I am sure is going to be an exciting and thought-provoking conversation. Today's panel is meant to dig deep and to unpack an extremely complex set of issues, namely equity and inclusion in the food system here on UC Berkeley's campus. And as Hortensia briefly mentioned, the idea for this panel really came out of a year's worth of work last academic year on this exact issue, building equitable and inclusive food systems on campus. And in that work, we brought together key actors who are doing work in food movements and food systems here on campus to think about what are the barriers to us creating equitable and inclusive food systems, and how do we overcome those barriers in actuality, not in sort of theory, but what can we do day to day to actually start to transform the system as we know it. And the panelists today will be, over the next hour and a half, having this same kind of conversation with you. We'll be talking about what exactly is equity, inclusion, and the food system. What do these terms actually mean? What are the barriers to us creating equitable and inclusive food systems? And how do we imagine real, meaningful, and transformative possibilities for a different kind of food system here on campus, one that is more equitable and inclusive? And as a way of setting the stage, I know our panelists will do the work of defining these terms, especially food system, but I just wanted to take a moment and say what I think equity and inclusion really mean. And equity and inclusion are these words we are hearing all over the place, especially on college campuses. They are I think words that are meant to do 2 different things. In saying that we have a problem with equity and inclusion, we're really naming that there's exclusion on college campuses and things are inequitable, that there's a problem. And it's also a vow to address meaningfully systemic injustice and inequality as it affects all members of the UC Berkeley community. So today we will be talking about that. Let me introduce these amazing panelists who will be helping us to have this conversation. First, we have El-Sadig El-Sheikh, who is the director of the Global Justice Program at the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. We also have Alistair Isles, who is an associate professor of environmental science, policy, and management, as well as a faculty co-director of the Berkeley Food Institute. And we also have with us today Jennifer Sauerwein, who's an assistant cooperative extension specialist in environmental science, policy, and management. And I want to direct you all to the program where you can find a full bio for each of these panelists. Each panelist will start off by talking for about 5 minutes about, to introduce themselves and to say briefly what they think equity, inclusion, and the food system actually mean. And we'll be going from broad. Elsa Dig will take us from the sort of food system systemically and globally, and we'll come down to sort of a more nuanced and micro-level conversation of what's happening here on campus. And then we will talk about barriers to participation and ideas for transformation. At that point, I'll take questions from the audience to wrap up the event. So please join me in giving a wide round of applause to our panelists today. So first up, we have Elsa Dig.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, BFI, and everybody working in this large project of how to think and build equitable food system at the UC Berkeley. As Kara mentioned, my name is Sadiq Al-Sheikh. I work with the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. I'm leading the work of the Global Justice Program, where my work focuses in broad issues related to socio-dynamics of structural arrangement in society, and that include food system, trade policy, financial system, global migration, Islamophobia, and other related issues. So today I will talk briefly about how our food system exists within 3 levels of structures: global, national, and local. And in that sense, there are many forces and dynamics impacting equity and inclusion within our food system. Here I will focus only on 2 of those forces and dynamics: financialization, and I will define them, and the second one is corporate control and consolidations. But before that, let me say just a couple of points of what we mean by equity and inclusion and what food system is. So equity and inclusion in terms of social system, on one hand, equity means more than just access. It means equitable representation in all social and political institutions and fair access to all social and economic opportunities that are guaranteed to all members of a society, regardless of their social differences. On the other hand, inclusions mean to have a meaningful voice and contribution in the design of social, cultural, and economic structures, and to have the right to organize and to demand on society and political institution any type of reform or transformations. Now, the food system means, as we know that the elements of our food production are diverse, complex, overlapping, and exist at many scales, from survival farming to multinational corporations food regime. Altogether constitute the product of a complex agriculture and food production that include trade agreements, financial system, labor markets, and upstream and downstream food supply chains. In that context, the food system encompasses all the processes and infrastructure required to feed a population. This includes food production, harvesting, processing, packaging, distribution, consumption, and disposal, as well as the input required and the outputs produced at each stage. As such, any food system functions within and is shaped by different social, political, economic, and environmental contexts at every scale, from the local to regional, and from the national to global. Now I will talk about those 2 dynamic and forces of financialization and corporate control and why they impacted our equitable food system, or food system in general. But let me just to define, for the sake of just bringing everybody in the same page. Financialization is a term used to describe a broad set of changes in the relationship between the financial sector, which include financial capital, financial services, and financial markets, and the real sector of any economy, which include manufacturing, agriculture, and services sectors. So financialization is the outcome of sophisticated and complex socio-technological intervention and networks, such as information technology, analytic techniques, and standardized representation of economic realities that facilitate the transmission and the processing of information within the global economic system. Furthermore, financialization is best understood as a force that enables the creation of a new non-real money assets and its ability to restructure these assets in a way to affect their monetary value and to generate profits from such dynamics. So in other words, or in simple words, financialization means the process where all value in economic transaction, whether real and present, or promised, or intangible, may be reduced to some type of tradable financial instruments, such as individual or government loans refinanced and securitized, or, for example, industrial pollution is sold in future market in a borderless, exclusive technological system. I hope that's kind of clear, but I will be happy to elaborate. On the other hand, corporate control and consolidation means the control of political and economic systems by corporation in order to influence policies on trade regulation, tax rates, market re-regulations, or as a common understand it, market deregulations, and wealth accumulation, among other measures. And to do all that and to produce a favorable environment for further corporate growth. Additionally, corporate consolidations have two aspects. One is horizontal, which alluded to the ownership and control within one part of the food system, such as production, processing, or distribution. And the second one is a vertical consolidation, which describes the consolidation of firms at more than one part of the food chain, such as upstream suppliers or downstream buyers. One example, I would say the last thing, one example of corporate control and consolidation, we can find it in the seed monopoly, which is another type of commodification and financialization of common human heritage, where financial instruments generated by global financial system are threatening small farmers' access to seeds. For example, in 2011, the top 10 agribusiness company, including giants like Bayer, Cargill, DuPont, Monsanto, Syngenta, and others, control over 60% of the global seed market share, with the value reaching beyond $26 billion. Furthermore, the projected seed market's value for 2018 expected to reach $85 billion. Now, we know that 4 of those 10 giants are emerging right now. 2 of them is already happening, which is Monsanto and Bayer, and the second one will be Syngenta and China, Chemical China or Chim China. So can we imagine if those 4 giant agribusiness wield their control beyond 2/3 of the whole entire seed market, which is very possible under this current economic logic, and how much political and economic influence they will have on our future food system. So finally, I will say the implication of such oligopoly is unthinkable, as the seeds continue to be under control and monopoly of these giant corporations. And as a result, our food diversity and food price will come under incredible threat. For example, between the year 1900, that's 1900, and 2000, our planet has lost almost 75% of its plant genetic diversity as a result of monoculture practice, which is advanced by industrial agriculture. Today, over 70% of our mainstream food is derived from only 12 plants and 5 animal species. 12 plants, 5 animal species. To put it simply, corporate control and consolidation over seed industry means less food diversity and more monocultural food production. And I will stop here and I will come back to talk about how the rise of the financial and financialization system. Thank you.
As Hortensia mentioned, my name is Melina, and I'll be reading for Alistair this afternoon. El Sadig has given us a broad structural view of what's driving injustice in the food system. I'd like to highlight the concept of food justice, which means assuring that everyone in the food system is not harmed, rather empowered, through producing and eating food. To see what food justice looks like, I strongly recommend the book called Food Justice that Robert Gottlieb and Anu Joshi at Occidental College wrote a few years ago. They argue that food justice reaches from farm plot to dinner table. It follows the whole supply chain. There are at least 3 vital questions we need to look into. First, what inequalities do farmers face in gaining access to their means of production, such as land, water, seeds, and credit? Minority farmers face pervasive exclusion. It's difficult to enter farming when you don't fit the dominant profile of what a farmer should look like. In 1920, almost 1 million African American farmers represented about 14% of the US farming population. Yet their numbers had dwindled to only 44,600 farmers by 2012. They farmed less than 0.4% of all farmlands. Much of this geography is due to the legacy of institutional racism. The US Department of Agriculture was notorious for its practices, such as denying loans to black farmers to help them retain their land. Much is now due to the neoliberal workings of the food system. The phrase land rights hasn't been heard in this country for a long time, but minority and small farmers have a right to what they need to grow their food, and they can demand justice in getting a fair share of the means of production. Second, what power do food and farm workers have to control their conditions of work? We've heard much about how immigrant workers are treated poorly, how farm workers are forced to endure summer heat in the Central Valley, how women in particular are often abused by foremen and contractors, how tomato pickers are made to live in dilapidated houses in Florida. Many immigrants are undocumented, meaning they have little recourse other than to suffer silently, as speaking up could result in deportation and splitting up of families. Ironically, and despite the deplorable conditions foisted upon these workers, without their labor, most fruit and vegetable industries simply wouldn't function. There are many other invisible workers in the food system who are being exploited, discriminated against, and harmed. Saru Jayaraman and the Restaurant Opportunity Centers are drawing much needed attention to the plight of cooks and waiters who are dependent not only on tips, but on lecherous managers for their jobs. And shelf stockers and checkout staff at supermarkets often work multiple jobs to make a living, let alone pay for health insurance. They don't have the ability to choose when to work, so they can't predict their hours week to week. But workers can organize for food justice and become visible. They too have rights to fair treatment. Many say that the fast food worker strikes of the last few years are one of the most active worker movements since the Great Depression. The 750 food workers at Harvard's cafes have just ended their 3-week strike, with promises for higher pay and health insurance from the university. Third, and finally, we arrive at food eaters, where access, cultural appropriateness, and nutritional adequacy of foods is a huge issue in this country. Whose foods are given priority in the food systems we have now? As of last year, it's thought that 42 million people, including 13 million children, are suffering from food insecurity, often compounded by housing and unemployment crises. It's not simply that many eaters can find it hard to get access to SNAP benefits, also known as the food stamps program. It's that many eaters don't have the choice, due to time pressure and low pay, but to buy the most convenient and cheapest calories their dollars can cover. Lack of public transportation is another huge obstacle, as in many cities, so-called food deserts are not really created by lack of supermarkets, but by lack of public transportation and sidewalks. How do we expect Black, Brown, and Mestizo communities to even have a chance of keeping their historically diverse foodways intact? Instead, it is often white and wealthier eaters who can choose to buy organic and local foods. So they are supporting diversity on the farm, which is good, as well as livelihoods for nearby farmers. But not only is it unjust that only a privileged few should benefit from eating locally and healthily, it's a classic market distortion. The demand for agroecologically grown food is potentially huge if economic justice for eaters can be connected to economic justice for farmers. Emphasizing food justice calls on us to ask for whom and for whose benefit the food system works. Farmers, workers, and eaters are not competing against each other. We are all made to compete by the system we live in. We can all find ways to break out of this straitjacket. In our university context, this means looking at how our collective teaching, research, and work are perpetuating injustice, and how what we do can advance justice for all.
Yeah, well, Alistair really sets the stage for what I'm going to talk about as a cooperative extension specialist in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management. My work seeks to understand and also address barriers and opportunities to building healthy, equitable, ecologically sustainable, and culturally relevant food systems by working collaboratively with stakeholders across the state together to co-create the research questions that we're exploring and also to support community-led solutions to these challenges. For those of you who are less familiar with cooperative extension, it's part of the land grant mission of the University of California that has a responsibility to ensure that the research that we're doing at the institution, the university, is relevant to the California public. So you can think of it as the outreach branch of the university, and there's folks like myself who are based at the university level, and there's folks that are based throughout counties across the state and the nation as well, all funded by the federal government. So, our responsibility is to not only generate research that is relevant to the public, but then to extend knowledge back to the communities that we're supporting. So my particular work really aims to create a more inclusive research agenda and outreach program, moving beyond this idea of just extending knowledge from the university to the public to really explore ways of co-creating, again, these research questions and support community-led solutions that they themselves have identified that can contribute to building healthy and equitable food systems. So my conversation today is really to ground some of the framing that Alistair and Alistair, you have similar sounding names, and Alistair have framed by sharing some specific examples of my work to highlight both food system exclusion and how it manifests here in California, and then also to look at community engaged efforts to build a more inclusive food system. So my first example draws on my work with immigrant and minority farmers that Alistair alluded to in the Central Valley. So California is historically the most agro-industrial farming system in the world. So it has been dominated by large industrial farms, but at the same time we're seeing a rise in the number of minority farmers who are entering into agriculture. From the last census to the current one, there's been a 20% increase in the number of minority farmers here in California, but they're struggling with accessing loans, capital, technical support, and a number of other challenges, largely resulting from language and cultural barriers, but also historical, understanding their histories and where they came from and why they're struggling to access some of these resources. So based on a study that some colleagues and I did a few years back with Southeast Asian farmers, namely the refugees from the Vietnam War, we wanted to better understand what the challenges were that they were facing, and absolutely they faced challenges accessing land, accessing markets, loans, and capital. But what was surprising was to look at the impact that California labor laws were having on their farming operations. So, agricultural labor laws were designed to regulate a form of agriculture to prevent exploitation of farm workers. But it discriminates against the practices that the Southeast Asian refugee farmers employ in terms of utilizing family labor. So family labor, having your family and friends come and help you on your farm, that's an illegal practice in California. And the the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement went out and fined a number of very small Hmong farmers who are working very hard, and they were fined upwards of an entire annual worth of income. Many of the farmers had to exit farming. So cooperative extension really tried to advocate for these farmers and work to elevate some of the concerns and look for opportunities to support them in trying to stay in business. A second example from my work is looking at urban food disparities and looking at efforts to increase access to healthy and affordable foods in our urban areas. Again, sort of tying back to kind of the corporate consolidation of our food system, we have the largest agricultural industry in the world with $35 billion worth of agricultural products being produced right here in our state, but we also have some of the highest rates of food insecurity in the nation. And 3 metropolitan areas in our state, Fresno, Bakersfield, and Modesto, have some of the highest rates of poverty and food insecurity, and yet they're growing the food for the world. So there's a lot of injustices that are happening there. We're seeing in California a rise and proliferation of amazing urban agriculture efforts to address some of these issues of poverty and food insecurity in our urban areas. But they're encountering a lot of barriers to land access, to secure land tenure, zoning challenges that inhibit the production and sale or exchange of urban produced foods. And the ability to access capital for their farming operations. Urban farmers have a real difficulty in accessing capital. So we have partnered with the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and who are also working with a number of organizations statewide to develop a grassroots financing guide for California farmers so that they're able to mobilize resources to support their efforts to either secure land tenure or to get loans and other funds to expand their efforts. An exciting development that really emerged out of the amazing grassroots work in the Detroit area in Michigan. Senator Stabenow has just announced an Urban Agriculture Act of 2016 that aims to create new economic opportunities to increase access to healthy foods in urban areas. So this would create a Department of Urban Agriculture at the USDA and provide a number of resources, research funds, and other resources to support urban agriculture. So we are seeing a lot of really positive outcomes from these grassroots community engaged work. Just one last moment, just to share out one last example, is the work I'm engaged in with a number of collaborators in Northern California, focusing on addressing challenges of native food insecurity. So I'm working with 3 tribes in Northern California on a collaborative research, education, and extension program that aims to enhance tribal health and food sovereignty in their area. So looking at not only increasing access to and consumption of healthy, fresh and culturally relevant foods, but also supporting tribal ecosystem and ecocultural restoration efforts that are really aimed at achieving greater sovereignty over their land, their cultural foods and cultural heritage, as well as their knowledge. So I just want to conclude by saying that it's really important to really think about, as academics and as scholars, the kind of research we're doing to ensure that it's community engaged and that it's responding to the needs of the community, and to ensure that all voices are contributing to the question of how do we build a more equitable and sustainable food system. Thanks.
Thank you. So you all have raised a plethora of very important issues in terms of understanding the intersection of the food system and issues of equity and inclusion broadly. And I wonder if you could comment on how you see these issues, either whether they are on the production or the consumption side, manifesting here at UC Berkeley. Sure, and anyone can go.
I think one of the astonishing report come out lately about just the state of the affair of how the people who are situated in the lowest strata of our society and accurately described enough by Jennifer that they produce our food, but they are the one who goes hungry. And not only just hunger in terms of food insecurity, but hunger contribute to many different other elements. In our campus, the amount of students who suffer from food insecurity that they have to make a trade-off between whether paying tuition or healthcare or renting apartment or just eating healthy food. And one thing I just want to bring to the conversation, the way in which we understand hunger is also problematic. Many of us and international agency and USDA consider hunger in terms of just food intake rather than calories intake rather than nutritional food. And of course, privileged folks, maybe like the people in this panel, they could afford to have access to nutritious food, but not every student does so, or any clerical or a person who work in a lower strata of the service at the university. So I've been reading just the last report just came out from Accidental College, and one thing stood for me, and that's how financialization and corporatization of the food system in operation and how it's manifested. Their finding says that there is more than 2/3, about 70% of UC system, clerical, administrative, and support workers struggle to put food on the table and are considered food insecure by the definition of USDA. This is astonishing, but it's not surprising to me. Not surprising because just the whole society, how the services, the institutions, and who benefits are extremely tilted and continue to marginalize the workers, people of color, native folks, low-income communities, communities of disabilities. All these folks suffer greatly because they have to make that hard trade-off. And it's about time we have to think about if we want to change our food system, it's not only changing how to access food. We need to change a lot of things in order that just to happen. It's not enough, even if tomorrow UC Berkeley region decided to give food free for everybody, it will be a problem. And those problems, they have a different manifestation. And this is the reason why I choose to work in the food, because through the food, you could work in different other injustices that we see in society, whether that geared toward violence toward particular group of people in our society or particular of social group in our society. So the whole idea of inclusivity and just participation in that emerge from the simple fact how you could survive and you don't need to make that trade-off. And that's necessitated to understand the larger forces that work maybe in a far removed level in abstracts, but actually their manifestation in our educational system that's extremely neoliberalized, extremely privatized, extremely under attack.
I could add to what Elstad was saying about just the manifestation of food insecurity on campus, not just with our students, but also with our staff. And the study that came out highlighted that those who are most vulnerable are the single parents, the women, the staff of color across the board had higher rates of food insecurity. And we're seeing this with many of our student families on campus, that they also have to do these really difficult trade-offs between, paying their tuition, feeding their families, and then oftentimes, families who might be first generation, they may have families that they're supporting back home. And so oftentimes they have to make these also very difficult trade-off decisions. I think it's important too to kind of elevate the conversation, above food insecurity and really look at some of the structural barriers that are really, causing some of these difficult decisions. And I think something that ties back to both production and consumption is this issue of land pricing and cost of living and cost of rent. So especially here in the Bay Area, we're seeing just skyrocketing, costs in terms of rent, and students are really struggling with just paying their rent, and there's not a lot of disposable income left at the end of the day. Our urban farmers are being priced out of their lands. There's an ongoing struggle right now with an urban farm trying to stay on the land. So as prices rise, the land gets sold. So there are, a lot of important policy questions, I think, that need to, look beyond these questions of food access to really look at some of those other underlying structural causes of food insecurity.
Alistair says, another point is that UC Berkeley, as a land-grant school, as Jennifer mentioned, has a unique power and responsibility to create much greater, fairer access to the food system for faculty, staff, students, and community members. The university can do this in many ways. It can take seriously its responsibility to equip diverse students, especially students of color, with practical farming and food system skills so that they can enter the food system and change it. The university can also provide more land to the students, faculty, and staff in order to learn how to produce and consume food. The university is better placed than most institutions to address the structural barriers, not through education, but by generating participatory research and policy advocacy aimed at these barriers. Not just through education, but also through the participatory research.
Did any of you want to add anything to that?
Maybe I'll just add on to what Alistair mentioned about, the opportunities to create spaces for, participatory food production on campus, where it can be not only, opportunity to increase access to food, but also learning about the food system more broadly through the practice. So experiential learning, engaging in production of your food, and all of the courses that UC and our department has been developing too, related to having a food system minor. So where, as students, you can learn more about the injustices in the food system while also engaging in production on the land. I think there's a challenge right now, and I think all of you are very intimately aware of our budgetary challenges at the university level, and so there's a lot of tension around best use of land. And so I think we recognize the value and the importance of creating these agroecological spaces across campus to foster the next generation of food system policymakers, activists, educators, and researchers. So I just wanted to highlight that point.
One last point I will add, and Jennifer can start to talk about it, is the idea of we need to challenge the conceptual framework that we operate in order to respond to particular problems. So if we define a problem in a clear way, we will have clear analysis, and therefore we will have a clear policy intervention. And by that I mean we really need to get away with this idea of food insecurity, because it's not a descriptive of what people face. Farmers and peasants and rural women around the globe, they've been pushing the envelope harder for the last 20 years to bring about food sovereignty as a framework, and what that means, how people could assert their sovereignty in terms of food production, and what that does to other elements in society. And people in the rural communities, especially in remote areas, facing more challenges than we do here in terms of democratic participation, violence against women, scarcity of natural resources, land grabs, seed grabs, water grabs. So they work against gigantic forces that try to strip them from their own natural world. And yet here we are better off a little bit, but we're struggling to understand that the more we assert this position for ourselves here, it will not only helping us, but it helps to sustain our planet. Because we can't go with the logic, the current economic logic we have in place. We just can't live longer. Maybe we could, but a couple generations down the road, they have to struggle a lot in order to just to breathe clean air. So food sovereignty is specifically stated that it's the right of people, communities, countries, region to design their own food system and to have the right to design the policy around it and to have the right to sit at the table when decision about food being made. Like who can access food, how food being produced, consumed, or even the food waste, for example. So they have a very brilliant ideas and that in the work. I've been working the last year or so about just looking around the globe, and this is including North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and Latin America, and the Caribbeans. That's people been doing this for a while. It's not something new. It's not an invention. It's just articulation of the struggle of those small business movement around the globe. And these groups, they consolidate, they're offered within a larger organization called La Via Campesina, which have members about almost 200 million small businesses. That's a huge number. And they've been able to exert demands and put forward concrete proposals. So I will really invite all of you, just go and check out La Via Campesina, the peasant path. And they have all the policy proposed, whether that in terms of international trade, whether that how you trade food, what the relationship with food. We've been convinced that food is for trade. But most peasants don't think of food that of trade. There is a special relationship, between the food and the land and the peasant that they produce that food. It's never been about to maximize profit out of that thing or to commodify it as we start to see it in our lifetime. So we need to challenge ourselves a little bit with those conceptual frameworks and not get trapped in a very narrow definition that doesn't allow us to be innovative, bold, and actually to demand reform in our society. If we don't do that, there is no transformation in society.
In the university environment, there are strong disincentives for faculty and staff in particular to cross disciplines, to engage with community groups such as the Asian and urban farmers that Jenny works with, and to carry out socially responsible research. The university itself can do much to encourage the resetting of research and teaching norms to embrace the sort of work that the panel is talking about. And this can spread to other universities across the country. As El Sadig said, there's a huge smallholder farmer movement around the planet that we hardly hear about in this country. And the university can also encourage the sorts of interactions with this larger movement as part of all our collective learning. We are not an enclave within the world.
I wonder if I might ask a follow-up question here. We talk about, it's very interesting, El Sadig, when you said, if we gave everyone food, right? That doesn't actually solve the question. And you brought that up too, Jennifer, when you said that there are these structural issues that we really need to address. And that reminds me of a conversation that we've had a lot over the last year in this project, which is that food insecurity is something you can see, you can touch, you can say, here's a problem, let's create policy to change this. But there's more subtle ways in which social inequalities get reproduced, so that, for example, those who actually join the food movements on campus or feel comfortable accessing one space versus another ends up being, divided by race and class or stratified by race and class, and all the ways that race and class stratify lots of things in society. And I wonder if you might reflect on that and talk a little bit about how you see us addressing those sort of more nuanced but also largely issues that are infusing the sort of structure of UC Berkeley in the food system.
One very important group that's often left out when we think about food systems is people with disabilities. There are very strong institutional barriers to the entry of people with disabilities into agriculture. We can see these barriers at Berkeley in many forms. One barrier is that faculty are often unwilling to provide accommodations to allow students with disabilities to participate in their courses, join research projects, and learn the practical skills of farming. For example, a professor refused to change the agricultural plots near campus to allow a student with a mobility disability to participate equally with other students. As a result, the student couldn't learn how to farm and felt disempowered and discouraged from thinking of herself as a farmer. This is a microcosm of the accessibility problems that are rife at Berkeley. There's much that Berkeley can do to train everyone on campus to understand the situations that people with disabilities live in, and to see that making accommodations is not only easy, but welcoming to everyone. The student is now working on a thesis to make this case for change.
Wow. I will try to match that, but one of the issues of structural barrier in society that have a different manifestation, whether that food system or just period, access to opportunity, is we have to understand it's not work of individuals. It's work of structures. So I really can care less who think of me of what. I don't care. But what I care about it is the institution and the structure that exists in the society where I live actually intentionally set up to marginalize me. And that's the most important question. If we thought about that, we start to think about humanizing everybody in our society. By just the fact doing that, we will definitely rethink about corporate control of our life. I mean, it's not only in the food system, but corporation control what research we do, whether we accept it or reject it. Who get funded and who didn't get funded, and what projects get more money to be funded or not. And if you challenge that system, it will be very hard for you to advance any claims. So I think is a simple practice that we need to look at the institution and the structure around us. And we try to think about how we can think about that homeless person in the street is also belong to our society. And she or he has the same rights, and they have the right to access the same opportunity we do. If we can do that, as a black person, for example, if we can do that, for me, I really can care less the white cop killing me, because the idea is not that the white policeman is waking up in the morning and come and decided to shoot al-Sadiq in the street. No, there is other forces that operate in their own psyche, troubling them, increasing their racial anxiety, and all this embedded within a system that is invisible but yet is really hurtful, not only toward black people or indigenous people or people with disability or LGBTQ or transgender, the list is long, or Muslims in our society, but is a system that is designed by virtue of the matter is to divide us in order to rule. So it seems like, what can I do? This is massive institution and structure as an individual. How can I do that? But the first step, I think, is just to start by doing what we all humans supposed to do, to humanize others. The minute we do that, I think we will have some clarity of understanding. I don't have to agree with you, but I will fight for your right to exist, to voice it out, and to have the space for that. And if we do that, I think in terms of the food system, it will happen as well. Because universities, especially public ones like ours, are for the public, by the public, which is now completely under threat of privatization and the logic of neoliberal policies that they have to compete with other, whatever that might be. They have to bring a student from some other places to increase, kind of their budget from international or out of institution, and that's by virtue of the matter make them neglect the very people that live around campus that they don't have access to these institutions. So I know it seems overwhelming, but it's really we have just to peel the onion a little bit in order to see at the core where we should start as individuals, as communities, and after that as institutions. And I think the debate around the elections and how law became both all the apparatus of electoral democracy in our country get to so low that actually dehumanize us and play with our intelligence of what we think our choices are.
Well, you both shared a tremendous amount. I would just add that I'm very inspired to see the number of people who came to this dialogue today, and I look forward to hearing from all of you as well. I think we are the people who are going to make these transformations happen. And as El Sadiq said, it starts with the individual who begins to acknowledge the bias that exists within our communities, within our institutions, and within ourselves, and really struggling to work through those. And I think what's really exciting about opportunities through cooperative extension and through the Berkeley Food Institute, where they're creating these spaces for collaborative research projects, where it's collaboration, not just cross-disciplinary, but also to engage the communities. And I think for all of us as we move forward in our work, we have to be mindful in the approach to our work. And again, as Alistair mentioned, the institution creates these structures that make it very difficult to move forward with engaging in this kind of collaborative and participatory research. It takes time. And, if you're on the tenure track, you're needing to get your publications out quickly. But it's important to inform and to elevate these conversations back to those who make the decisions around how research is created and funded and employed, and the merit system and the value system. So again, I think through this approach of more collaborative and participatory research, you can actually engage and bring in those voices that really need to be at the table. Working with Native communities, we need to engage not only tribal government members, but tribal members themselves, because there's differences between what the tribal government and what tribal members may have as their priorities. So by all of us being in this conversation, we're already on the right track to recognizing these disparities that exist within society and how that can inform the kind of work we do.
Something that stood out to me at the workshop earlier this year, where the Equity and Inclusion Group presented its map, which you'll be hearing more about later, was that there is a pervasive lack of clear accountability for the variety of practices and activities affecting the ability of various groups to gain equitable access to the campus and city food system. There are few people who are clearly accountable for whether students are homeless, hungry, unable to access farm plots, for whether staff are poorly paid and treated. It's a key component of the neoliberal economics era that this accountability is weakened, hidden, and denied, especially in the guise of the market. So one very concrete step we can take is to start finding who and what is creating the web of food injustices on campus, and off campus as well, because food companies are affecting what we eat, and develop accountability mechanisms. We can, for example, make it much easier for workers to go on strike and to have their demands respected and heard. We can demand to hear the university's reasons for making its decisions as regards the campus food system. This is also true of the larger society.
So that is great, because my next question was about solutions, but you all have already started to bring those up. And I think for the sake of time, then we'll move right to questions from the audience. Yeah, go ahead. And could you state your name as well?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Dunkins. My question is, what role does the campus, UC Berkeley, or the whole UC conglomerate have in protecting resources such as the Yield Tract for communities, and why are we seeing such a lack or pushback from these people that have the power to say what happens on that land?
Yeah, so the question was about specifically the Guild Tract, right? And why is the university pushing back so hard on that project? And what responsibility does the university have towards projects such as the Gill Tract? Is that about correct? Okay.
Well, I mean, it's an important question, and it's a challenging question. I spoke a little bit to that earlier in the sense that we are in a budget crisis, and so the university is trying to figure out ways of, addressing all the needs that the university has. And so the Gill Tract is the area that's under cultivation as part of the agricultural research experiment station. And there are a number of principal investigators out there doing, applied research and basic science research that is a part of our land grant mission. And I think the College of Natural Resources has a strong commitment to keeping that land in agriculture, and has already demonstrated a commitment to support this collaborative university community partnership through the UC Gill Tract Community Farm. I'm happy to talk more about that, or others of you in the audience who are involved in that, I'm sure, can share as well. And it's an exciting initiative, and there's several of us within the College of Natural Resources who are really advocating to try to not only secure that space into the future, but also hopefully expand the kind of collaborative research that I've been sharing out today. So I am hopeful that we're going to keep moving in the direction of securing these spaces for students and community members to work together, for shared learning.
Do you mind if we add?
Yeah.
I'm Ann Thrupp at the Berkeley Food Institute. Might just also say that we've been very pleased at the Berkeley Food Institute to collaborate with the College of Natural Resources and with Jenny Sauerwein, UC Cooperative Extension, on pursuing additional funding for the Gill Tract in particular. And we've been very fortunate to receive additional funding, which is going towards the collaborative efforts with the community. And fortunately, some of that money is coming through the Office of the President, which is committed to meeting food security needs. So connecting the production from the Gill Tract to the food needs on campus, food sovereignty efforts that are going on campus to meet some of the challenges for people who don't have enough food to eat. So we're really encouraged that there's some positive steps forward and some increasingly significant funding that's going to be channeled to that. So I think it's a really, even though obviously there's been challenges in getting to this place, I think that the future is looking quite optimistic. We've had recent meetings that really suggest that the university is on board with this, so we'll just keep on working together and see that.
And I encourage all of you to come out this Sunday for the Halloween Harvest Festival at the Gill Tract. A lot of great stuff. You'll learn a lot more about all the activities and wonderful volunteers who've put in countless hours to grow over, I've been told, 55,000 pounds of food that have been distributed to a lot of different organizations in the community, over 45 organizations who support food access programs, and also into the UC Berkeley Food Pantry. So come on out and learn more about it.
So this is not a question, I just wanted to add that about the funding to the Gill Tract. Part of that funding went to a new fellowship program. I'm one of the fellows. We're 7 fellows. They're starting this academic year, the fellowship at the Gill Tract, and we're really excited, and we're trying to expand the distribution and the learning experiences at the Gill Tract. So I really encourage you as well to come on Sunday, and if you have any questions, I will be there and would be happy to answer as well.
And your name?
Oh, and my name is Emmy Klatschke. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very wonderful to have so many students involved.
I saw a hand over here.
Hi, my name is Daniela Solis. Is a sustainable food system achievable in the neoliberal model of cities today? In my own observations, I have found that food access through the implementation of resources such as urban agriculture is often linked to displacement.
That's a very good one. The answer is no, it's not. It can't be sustainable under the current economic logic, because the logic of this system, the neoliberal system, is excessive privatization and excessive also undemocratic processes of the design of the institutions and making the policy. And I will give you one of the concrete examples. For example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that negotiated between the United States and another 11 Pacific Rim nations. For the last 100 years, the US Constitution required, give the authority for the president to enter a negotiation. They could enter it in secret with other nations. But the text of any trade deal has to be fully available to the elected official by the public and for the journalist that could investigate what in those documents. But under the logic of neoliberalism, they have to hide that because 500 of corporate consultants, they sit for 6.5 years designing, writing those agreements. And the whole entire thing is a disgrace and disrespect to the US Constitution and other 11 nation constitutions. If we imagine that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is almost half, over 33% of the global trade, and food sits in the heart of it. So when you think that's the system we're facing with, we're operating within, it's very hard to think about sustainable food productions because sustainability means also paying attention to the natural world that we live in, you know, how much of carbon dioxide that we produce through industrial agriculture is about almost 56% into atmosphere, just come from agriculture. So imagine if you calculate all the trains and weaponry and ships and cars and the lighting system, all of them together, the production of that carbon dioxide, for example, is less than the one produced by industrial agriculture. And those what embedded in those large trade deals. So this system, that's what it pushes for, regardless of going to generate more jobs or all this is speculation and it's not true. So my simple point is no, but our intervention is we need to think about how to reform the system. I know I'm not a reform guy, but I believe that in order to change to transformation, you have to hunt also reform. And reform only will happen when you shame the power dynamics and you tilt the conversation in public discourse. So we cannot be absent. And it seems to me even lunatic folks who are running for president opposing the TPP. So in that sense, almost there is a consensus among American people that this Trans-Pacific Partnership is going against their interests. And not only that, Trans-Pacific TPP is a first step toward other two large trade agreements that will consolidate the whole entire service industry, agriculture, and environmental protection, which is TTIP between the United States and 28 European countries, and the other one is TISA in the service industry. So if the TPP passed, the other two will pass. And if they pass, we cannot change anything because they override our government ability to protect our environment, food safety, balance in agriculture. So it's unbelievable contradiction. So I don't think it will be easy to have any sustainable system if you don't know both the forces and dynamics that in their essence actually hindering us from doing anything good.
And it's not just the TPP. It is also the Transatlantic Partnership and the Europe-Canadian Partnership treaties. Fortunately, there are many Europeans who are opposing these anonymous and opaque treaties, and they have mobilized against the negotiations to the extent that a number of European countries are becoming more reluctant to sign.
Hi, Vivek Narayan. You've mentioned a lot of structural influences and institutional influences that, get us as individuals to make the decisions that we make. Nutrition is like a really crowded space. There's all this information that's floating around. Is there something concrete that we as individuals can do to change our framing reference to the way we make food decisions that will somehow have a knock-on effect back to the structures and back to the institutions? Because it seems to me that all of us make food decisions every day. Yeah?
That's an interesting question.
I could take a stab at that. For example, I will advocate for people not to eat meat. One of the ways that, why is that? It's not about choices, but eating meat, producing meat is actually destroying the ecosystem. If you know that 40% of our agricultural production for food, it goes to livestock feed. So actually it's not going to human. And the space that available, especially in the global south country for the production of food, is being shrinking down to produce, whether that for livestock feed because of the high consumption of meat, or for biofuels that is rampant around the globe. And one concrete example of that, the triangle between Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, one of the most richest, wealthiest triangle in the world in terms of agriculture. The people who live there, the production is very high because they produce soybeans, right, for the Chinese industry for meat productions. But the people who live in that place, they suffer from lack of nutrition. So we could see is actually there is manifestation of this. So if, as individual or community, if we challenge that system, I don't know to whom they're gonna sell it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a supply and demand market. So, I mean, this one option will come out.
You know, I'll add to that in terms of just sort of the practicality. I mean, I think there's a lot of well-intentioned to vote with your fork, by making choices around, what you eat. And I do believe that that's a really personal decision that you can make. Choice around eating meat or not eating meat, looking at the ingredients list and choosing things that don't have palm oil in it because of the implications in terms of the devastation of the forest for palm oil production. There's other ways of voting, with your fork by purchasing at the farmer's market and purchasing from those farmers that may be on a minority farmer or a woman farmer. I think taking it to the next level in terms of how you can, as an individual, sort of make, start influencing policy is becoming engaged in your local food policy council. The food policy councils across the state are engaged in some really exciting work where they're tracking all the bills in the state legislature and getting support to pass policies that are more enabling for urban agriculture, more enabling for the production production of value-added foods in the home. The Homemade Cottage Food Act was passed that enables individuals to produce a certain range of value-added products in their home and sell it. So that reduces the economic barrier that many of the lower-income folks may have in terms of renting a commercial kitchen to be able to produce these value-added products. So, getting engaged in your local food policy council, getting aware of all the different food policy options that are out there, and then identifying ways of supporting that, I would suggest as well.
It's a difficult question to answer because we all live in a food environment that is hard to alter. We are bombarded with messages to eat processed foods and to shop at supermarkets that are part of the consolidation trends that El Sadig mentioned. So we need to change the environment, and there are many ways that we can reclaim our agency, as Jenny says. We can change our purchasing decisions, we can favor foods from fair and ecologically sustainable farms, we can work to pass policies that target the food environment.
Can I add one thing as well before we go to, I know the last question. So in the work that I do, I've been interviewing people in several different neighborhoods about the kind of choices that they make and how they make those choices and how they feel about those choices. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about this idea of voting with your fork is that it almost always comes with moralizing the poor. That when we see that we've made a good choice, it's sort of along this binary of, well, that's a bad choice. And when we see who we imagine is attached to that bad choice, it's usually low-income people of color or just low-income people. And I think that, we talk about this idea of food deserts, or again, this concrete idea of what food is accessible in communities, as if just putting one grocery store in there solves that problem. And if it doesn't solve the problem, there's something wrong with the people who live in that neighborhood, right? There's this culture of poverty argument that's so easy to insert. And I actually think that all of us who decide to vote with our fork are fortifying ideas that we have about what it means to be a low-income person and the kind of choices that you make there, and justifying opting out. And I think there's something really dangerous about opting out, because then we become, our target is the ethical dimensions of the food we can access, instead of seeing how just that being available at a higher price means and actually reproduces the food systems across the board. So we have time for one more question.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to ask this last question. Of course, this will continue with conversation. We have a reception coming. We have this amazing opportunity with a new chancellor coming in and a lot of shakeup on really high-level management of UC Berkeley. What would be shortly, and I want to ask all four of you, Kara included, the one thing you would want the new chancellor to do to change the food system on our campus?
That's a difficult one.
Well, I'll start. I'll just repeat myself. I'm a huge advocate for creating spaces for students and community members to grow their own food and learn about it. So I would encourage the new chancellor to secure and preserve all existing agricultural spaces and explore alternative spaces on campus to augment food production and experiential learning opportunities.
Even if it sounds unrealistic, but I will whisper in the new chancellor's ear to reduce the tuition fees for undergrad and graduate students.
Do you want to go, Karen?
Well, the one thing that's coming to my mind actually is that what we know is that administrators, and the chancellor included, their salaries are increasing, even though student debt is also increasing and tuition is also increasing. And so I recommend that they take a pay cut and they put that money somewhere else.
I agree with Jenny. The new chancellor should expand the spaces where students, community members, and staff can learn about production experientially, and also take a big pay cut to set the example.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I have the privilege of closing the discussion today, and I just want to thank so much all of you, Kara and Jenny and Al-Sadig and Alistair and Melina for helping out here, and to our captioners, Jane and April, for a tremendous panel. So let's give another round of applause. Thank you. So, and please understand that I'm speaking on behalf of the Berkeley Food Institute and many others on the campus who are really involved in the Equity and Inclusion project on campus and beyond. So I also want to express my very sincere thanks to Rosalie Z. Fanchel, who BFI. And as all of you probably know, Rosalie, as the program manager, has done a tremendous amount of work to lead the planning and organization of this event. And also to thank Melina and Hortensia and Kara, who also were very involved in all the planning. So thanks so much. So I realize many of you have additional questions and have additional experiences and ideas to share. So we would encourage you to stay for food. We'll have food and beverages following the end here. But before we break for food and beverages, I want to reiterate that the Berkeley Food Institute is very committed to advance equity, justice, and inclusion in food systems globally, nationally, and regionally, and certainly here on campus. And we're really very excited to be involved in this collaborative effort with others on campus and beyond. We're currently in the final week of a crowdfunding campaign. And this has been another part of the work that Rosalie, Melina, and Kara and Hortensia have been very involved in, among others. So we're trying to raise funds to continue this type of work. So consider making a gift. It ends on October 31st. So if you know of others interested, it's on. You can find it on the site crowdfund.berkeley.edu/BFI, or you can go to our website and find it.
We have a computer here with the website open.
Yeah. So also it has an excellent video that you might want to check out. So help us spread the word about that. We also realize that there's a lot of work that really needs to be done in this area. We're optimistic that these kinds of activities are really important towards broader systemic structural efforts. Maybe a small microcosm, but we all have to work together towards making these changes. And we're really inspired that many of you in this audience today participating in this event, including student groups and faculty and staff and community organizations, are also doing work to attempt to address structural exclusion and to build incentive and inclusive food systems and more activities in this area. So we thank you for your efforts as well. Let's have a round of applause for that as well. It truly is very gratifying and exciting to see how many students are engaged in this as well. It's just a really important part of the work that we're doing to support those efforts. We'd like to urge you to attend a very special event taking place on Saturday, November 19th, that BFI and others are organizing, on Black liberation and the food movement. We're involved with several community organizations in that, so that's Saturday, November 19th again, so look out for the information about that. Thank you also for your consideration in joining us for this discussion today. We also would like to thank Cal Dining, who is providing the great food for our reception. They've been very generous in providing that, and many of you know that Cal Dining is engaged in these types of efforts as well. So we're excited to have that kind of leadership of our students and staff involved at Cal Dining. So we'll hope you enjoy that food now, and thank you again for coming, and enjoy the evening.